In the early 1930s, the United States of America did not fall all at once. It did not crumble in a singular, explosive moment of destruction. Instead, the greatest economy in the world was breaking quietly, slowly, and painfully. It was a disintegration that happened bank by bank, home by home, and life by life. By the time the calendar turned to 1933, the nation was standing on the precipice of a financial apocalypse. The factories that once roared with the sound of industrial progress had fallen silent, gathering dust in the silence of the Great Depression. The banks, the vaults of the people's trust, were failing at an alarming rate. Millions of Americans were unemployed, wandering the streets in a daze of desperation. But the most dangerous casualty of this era was not money itself. It was confidence. That invisible, fragile foundation that makes a currency work had completely evaporated. This is not merely a story of numbers fluctuating on a stock chart or dry economic policies. This is a human story. It is a story of gnawing fear, of families losing their life savings in the blink of an eye, and of a nation that found itself dangerously close to running out of money entirely. This is the story of 1933, the year America nearly went bankrupt. To understand the crash, we must first understand the high that preceded it. The 1920s were christened as the Roaring Twenties, a decade that felt like a permanent arrival of the future. For the average American, life seemed to be transforming into a never-ending celebration of progress. Factories were producing goods at a pace the world had never seen before, churning out automobiles, radios, and household appliances in endless streams. The stock market became the new national pastime. It seemed that stocks only had one direction to go, and that was up. Credit was incredibly cheap and easy to obtain, allowing people to buy things they couldn't afford with money they didn't have. Everyone, from Wall Street tycoons to shoeshine boys, believed that this prosperity was the new permanent reality. They believed the boom would last forever. But beneath this glittering surface of wealth and jazz music, the economic system was rotting. It was incredibly fragile. Banks were lending money recklessly to speculators who had no intention of paying it back, using the depositors' hard-earned cash as fuel for a gambling fire. People were buying stocks on margin, a practice that involved borrowing money to gamble on the market, leveraging their assets to the breaking point. The economy looked like a titan of strength, but it was actually built on a house of cards, constructed from debt, wild speculation, and blind, irrational optimism. In history teaches us one harsh lesson. Illusions, no matter how beautiful, do not last forever. The illusion shattered on October 29, 1929, a day that would be etched into history as Black Tuesday. In a single terrifying session, the stock market collapsed with a violence that no one had predicted. Billions of dollars vanished into thin air. It is important to remember that this money did not physically disappear. Rather, it evaporated psychologically. The perceived wealth that people thought they possessed was revealed to be a mirage. Panic spread through the crowd on Wall Street faster than the ticker tape could report the falling prices. Investors, driven by sheer terror, rushed to sell their shares at any price, creating a deluge of sell orders that the market could not absorb. The banks, which had foolishly invested their depositors' money into this volatile market, began to tremble and then fail. In the immediate aftermath, a strange denial took hold. Many economists and politicians assured the public that this was just a temporary correction, a bump in the road. They told America to stay calm and hold on. They were tragically wrong. That bump was actually the first step off a cliff, and the fall had only just begun. Between 1930 and 1933, the financial contagion spread from Wall Street to Main Street. During these 3 harrowing years, over 9,000 American banks collapsed and shut their doors forever. When a bank failed in the 1930s, the consequences were absolute and unforgiving. Depositors lost everything they had. Savings funds, retirement funds, and college tuitions disappeared overnight. Entire lifetimes of hard work were erased from existence with a simple flip of a sign on the door. At that time, there was no Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC. There was no government insurance. There was no safety net to catch the falling families. When a bank ran out of money, the people lost their cash. As news of these failures spread, panic gripped the nation. People would line up outside their local banks at dawn, desperate to withdraw their cash before the bank ran dry. This phenomenon is known as a bank run, and it is the fastest, most efficient way to kill a financial system. A bank cannot function if everyone demands their money at the same time, because the money isn't there, it has been lent out. This highlighted a terrifying truth. Money only works when people believe it exists. Once the belief is gone, the money is gone. As the banks collapsed, the money supply in the economy began to vanish, creating a terrifying economic phenomenon known as deflation. This is the opposite of inflation, and in many ways it is far more dangerous. As the supply of money dried up, prices for goods began to plummet. Wages were slashed as businesses tried to survive. Store shelves were full, but no one had the money to buy what was on them. This created a deadly spiral. While prices and wages fell, debts remained the same. A mortgage that was manageable when a man had a job became impossible to pay once he was unemployed and wages dropped. Farmers, unable to sell their crops for a profit, lost their land for foreclosure. Families who had bought homes on credit were evicted. Businesses, seeing no demand, shut their doors permanently. By 1933, the statistics were apocalyptic. 25% of the American workforce was unemployed. Industrial production had collapsed to a fraction of what it was just a few years prior. The economy was not just in a recession, it was in a free fall, plummeting towards the ground with no parachute. To make matters worse, the United States was shackled by the gold standard. At the time, the US dollar was not just a piece of paper, it was a promise to pay a specific amount of gold. This meant that the government could not simply print more money to solve the crisis. The amount of money in circulation was strictly limited by the amount of gold sitting in the Federal Reserve's vaults. As fear gripped the nation, the American people lost faith in banks and paper money. They turned to the one thing they had always trusted: gold. People began hoarding gold coins and bullion, stuffing them under mattresses and burying them in backyards. They rushed to the banks to exchange their paper dollars for metal. This created a massive outflow of gold from the banking system. As gold left the country and left the banks, the money supply tightened even further, choking the economy. Without gold reserves, the entire dollar system was at risk of total implosion. The government was running out of the very metal that backed its currency. By early 1933, the United States government found itself in an impossible situation. The banking system was on life support, with institutions failing daily. The gold reserves that backed the dollar were draining away at an unsustainable rate. Public confidence had not just been shaken, it had been obliterated. The system desperately needed more money to stimulate the economy and save the banks, but the government was trapped by its own rules. Because of the gold standard, they could not print money without the gold to back it up. They were trapped in a cage of their own making. If nothing changed, the United States faced a complete banking collapse, a government default on its debts, and a total loss of economic control. America was not technically bankrupt on paper, but in reality, it was dangerously close to financial death. The old ways of doing things were killing the patient. On March 4, 1933, in the midst of this chaos, Franklin Roosevelt was sworn in as the 32nd President of the United States. The atmosphere in Washington was heavy with panic and uncertainty. America was in a state of psychological breakdown. In his inaugural address, Roosevelt looked at the terrified nation and delivered words that were calm but decisive, aiming to cut through the fog of fear. He famously said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." But while he spoke of hope, behind the scenes his administration was already planning emergency measures. These were not normal political maneuvers. They were radical, unprecedented, and drastic measures that would permanently alter the relationship between the American people and their money. The time for gradual change was over. The patient needed immediate, shock-inducing surgery. Just days after taking office, President Roosevelt did something shocking and unthinkable in modern times. He shut down the entire banking system. He declared a bank holiday, closing every bank in the country. Every account, every transaction, and every withdrawal was frozen. For several terrifying days, Americans could not access their money. They could not pay for groceries or buy medicine with cash from their accounts. It was a moment of sheer terror for the populace. However, this drastic action had a specific purpose. It stopped the bleeding. It halted the bank runs. During this forced pause, the government and the Federal Reserve inspected the banks, determining which ones were solvent and healthy enough to reopen, and which ones were too far gone to be saved. When the banks were allowed to reopen, only the soundest institutions opened their doors. Slowly, tentatively, confidence began to return. People saw that the reopened banks were safe, and they redeposited their cash. But this was only the first step in a radical transformation of the American economy. On April 5, 1933, President Roosevelt signed one of the most controversial executive orders in American history, Executive Order 6102. This order made it illegal for American citizens to hoard gold. It required citizens to surrender their gold coins, gold bars, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper dollars. Refusal to comply was not an option. It carried the penalty of a heavy fine, up to $10,000, and imprisonment for up to 10 years. This was not a theoretical economic theory. This was the law of the land. The government effectively confiscated private gold holdings of the American people to save the dollar system. It was a move that seized private property to stabilize the national currency. Today, such a concept seems unthinkable in a free society, but in 1933, it was viewed as a necessary survival tactic. The government needed that gold to back the dollar and to show the world that the U.S. was solvent. After the government had collected the gold from the citizens, they took the next controversial step. They raised the official price of gold. By changing the price at which the government bought and sold gold, they effectively devalued the U.S. dollar. This might sound like technical manipulation, but the effect was profound. With one decision, the government increased its own power to create money. By devaluing the dollar, they made American goods cheaper for foreign buyers, which helped exports. More importantly, it allowed the government to manage its massive debts more easily. It weakened the grip of deflation by slightly inflating the currency. Control was restored to the central government. America had stepped back from the edge of the abyss, but the system had changed forever. The dollar was no longer tied to a fixed amount of gold in the same way. It was now a tool of government policy. So, looking back at the events of that tumultuous year, was America actually bankrupt in 1933? Technically, the government did not file for bankruptcy in the way a corporation might. However, the reality was far grimmer. The banking system had collapsed, the government had confiscated gold from its own citizens, the dollar had been devalued, emergency powers had been invoked to save the state. In any other context, these actions would be the clear signs of a financial failure. America survived not because the existing system worked, but because the rules of the game were completely rewritten in the middle of the match. The government admitted that the old rules of the gold standard were killing the economy, so they abandoned them to save the nation. It was a survival strategy born of desperation. The decisions made in 1933 cast a long shadow over the next century of American history. These events led to a massive expansion of federal control over the economy. It marked the beginning of the modern safety net, including the creation of the FDIC to ensure bank deposits. It signaled a shift away from the gold standard, a process that would continue for decades until 1971, when President Nixon finally severed the last link between the dollar and gold. The events of 1933 established the precedent that the government has the power to intervene in the economy on a massive scale. It changed the American mindset, teaching a generation that cash under the mattress was not safe, and that the value of money is determined by policy, not just by what is in the ground. But it all began in that desperate year of 1933. Today, we live in a world of digital money. We trust numbers on screens and promises from institutions. We rarely carry cash, and gold is a relic of the past for most people. But the history of 1933 offers a crucial warning for the modern age. It shows us that money is not permanent. It shows us that financial systems, no matter how strong they seem, can fail. And most importantly, it shows us that the rules can change overnight. In 1933, the government made it illegal to own gold. What could they do in a future crisis? 1933 proves one thing clearly. Even the strongest economy in the world can nearly collapse if confidence is lost. It reminds us that our financial security is often more fragile than we would like to admit. America survived 1933. We are here today because of the radical decisions made by a desperate government. But that survival came at a cost. Power shifted from the people and the banks to the federal government. The nature of money changed from a tangible asset to a fiat currency controlled by the state. The system became something entirely new. As we look at the economic challenges of our own time, we must ask ourselves a difficult question. The question is not whether America nearly went bankrupt in 1933. The historical record confirms that it did. The real question is, could it happen again? We like to think that we are immune to such disasters now, that we are too sophisticated, too advanced. But history does not repeat itself exactly. It never follows the same script twice. However, as the old saying goes, it often rhymes. The lessons of 1933 remain a warning that we ignore at our own peril.